The massive space station floated in the dark void between stars. Its white walls gleamed under the light of distant suns. This was the Galactic Federation Training Center, and inside its halls sat the most advanced flight simulator in all of our known space. Commander Zethkar stood in front of the huge control room window. His blue skin had a metallic shine, and his 4 arms were crossed over his chest. He was not happy. Another new species wanted to test their pilots on the master flight test. In his long life, he had seen this happen many times. They all failed. Simulator had been running for 847 years. In all that time, not one pilot had beaten the final test. The best minds from across the galaxy had tried. Warriors from the fierce Karathi Empire had failed. The smart machine beings from the Digital Collective had failed. Even the mysterious energy creatures from the far rim had given up. Lieutenant Vexana walked up to him. Her green scales caught the light from the control panels. She looked nervous. "Sir, the human pilot will arrive soon. Should we prepare the standard briefing?" Zethkar made a clicking sound with his mouth. This meant he was annoyed. "Another young species thinks they can do what others cannot. Tell me, Lieutenant, what do we know about these humans?" Vexana looked at her datapad. "They only learned to travel faster than light about 100 years ago. Their technology is basic compared to most Federation members. They use simple rockets and basic computers. Their ships are made of metal and plastic, not the advanced materials we use. And they think they can beat our simulator?" Zethkar shook his head. "The ethereal masters tried for 3 full days. They can move through solid matter and think at the speed of light. If they could not solve the test, what hope does a human have?" The control room was filled with the soft hum of machines. Dozens of alien technicians worked at their stations. They monitored every part of the simulator. The quantum computers that ran the test were the most powerful in the galaxy. They could create perfect copies of any space battle or flying situation. Technician, Morden slid over on his tentacles. His species did not have legs like humans. Instead, they moved like sea creatures. "Commander, all systems are ready. The master test scenario is loaded and waiting." The master test was not like normal flying tests. It had been designed by the smartest military minds in the Federation. The test pilot had to fly through a dangerous asteroid field filled with enemy ships. They had to find and steal a special device from a heavily guarded space fortress. Then, they had to make it back to the starting point alive. The test had 17 different enemy ships that would hunt the pilot. Each one used different weapons and tactics. The asteroid field was a maze with no clear path through it. The fortress had weapons that could destroy large battleships in seconds. Most pilots never made it past the first 5 minutes. "Sir," said Vexana, looking at her scanner. "The human transport ship is approaching. They will dock in 10 minutes. Zethkar walked to the window that looked out at the docking bay. He could see the human ship getting closer. It was small and gray, nothing special to look at. It did not have the smooth curves of Altarian ships or the crystal beauty of vegan craft. It looked like a metal box with engines attached. "I do not understand why High Command approved this test," Zethkar said to himself. "Humans have been in space for such a short time. They have fought in only a few small wars. Their pilots have no experience with the kind of advanced tactics needed for the master test." The docking bay doors opened with a loud clang. Air rushed out into space for a moment before the force fields kicked in. The human ship landed with a heavy thud. Steam came out from under its hull as the engines cooled down. A few minutes later, the airlock opened. A human male stepped out onto the station. He was average height with brown hair and wore a simple blue flight suit. He carried a small bag and looked around the docking bay with interest. This was Jake Morrison, test pilot from Earth. He was 28 years old and had been flying for 10 years. On Earth, he was known for being a good pilot, but also for doing things that made his teachers worry. He had a habit of trying new ways to fly that other pilots thought were crazy. Jake walked through the station corridors following the signs to the main briefing room. He passed aliens of many different species. Some walked on legs like him. Others floated in the air or moved on wheels. A few were so strange he could not figure out how they moved at all. The briefing room was large and white. Zethkar waited, for him at the front, along with several other alien officers. Their faces showed doubt and concern. They had seen many confident pilots before. All of them had failed. "Welcome to the Federation Training Center," Zethkar said in a formal voice. "I am Commander Zethkar, the director of this facility. You are here to attempt the master flight test." Jake nodded and looked around the room. The walls were covered, with screens showing flight paths, energy readings, and complex math equations. Everything looked very advanced and serious. "What exactly does this test involve?" Jake asked. Lieutenant Vexana stepped forward. "The master test is the most difficult flight simulation ever created. You must pilot a Federation fighter through a dangerous asteroid field. 17 enemy ships will try to destroy you. You must reach the central fortress, steal the quantum beacon from inside, and return to the starting point." "How long do I have?" Jake asked. 47 minutes, Zethkar replied. "Though no pilot has ever needed more than 15 minutes before being destroyed." Jake smiled. This surprised the aliens. Most pilots looked worried or scared when they heard about the test. Jake looked excited. "Sounds like fun," he said. "What is the success rate?" The room went quiet. Vexana and Zethkar looked at each other. Finally, Zethkar spoke. "In 847 years of operation with over 2 million test flights, the success rate is 0%. No pilot has ever completed the master test." Jake's smile got bigger. "Well, that just means no one has figured out the right way to do it yet." The alien officers looked at each other with expressions that did not need translation. They all thought the same thing. This human was either very brave or completely insane. Maybe both. But Jake was already walking toward the simulator chamber, ready to try something that had defeated the best pilots in the galaxy. He did not know that in the next hour, he would break the most advanced computer system ever built and change how the entire galaxy thought about flying and fighting in space. Turkey. Test was about to begin. The simulator chamber was huge and round. Jake walked through the heavy metal doors and heard them lock behind him with a loud click. The room was empty except for a single pilot seat in the center. Above him, below him, and all around him were blank gray walls that would soon become his battlefield. Jake sat down in the pilot chair. It felt strange at first because it was designed for many different alien body types. But it adjusted itself to fit his human shape. Straps came across his chest and legs to hold him in place. A helmet lowered down from above and covered his head. Everything went dark for a moment. Then the walls disappeared. Jake found himself sitting in the cockpit of a Federation starfighter. Through the clear front window, he could see endless black space filled with floating rocks. Some of the asteroids were as small as cars. Others were as big as mountains. They moved slowly in all directions, spinning and tumbling through the darkness. The ship's control panel lit up with dozens of buttons, switches, and screens. Most human pilots would need time to learn what everything did. But Jake had studied Federation ship designs during his trip to the station. He knew enough to fly and fight. "Beginning master test scenario," said a computer voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You are piloting Federation Fighter Unit 7. Your mission is to cross the Kepler asteroid field, destroy 17 enemy targets, recover the quantum beacon from the central fortress, and return to base. Time limit is 47 minutes. All Federation flight rules and safety protocols apply." Jake looked at the maze of floating rocks ahead of him. The asteroids formed a thick wall that stretched in every direction. There were small gaps between them, but the spaces were narrow and the rocks were always moving. Most pilots would fly slowly and carefully, trying to find safe paths through the maze. Jake pushed the engine control to full power and flew straight, toward the biggest asteroid in front of him. In the control room, Commander Zethkar watched the main screen with confusion. "What is the human doing? Standard protocol requires slow approach speed and careful navigation planning." Technician Morden's tentacles danced over his control panel. Warning lights started flashing. "Sir, the pilot is approaching the asteroid field at maximum velocity. This will result in immediate collision and mission failure." But Jake did not hit the asteroid. At the last second, he turned his ship upside down and dove under the giant rock. The asteroid's gravity grabbed his ship and pulled it faster. Instead of fighting the pull, Jake used it to slingshot around the rock and shoot toward the next one. "Impossible," whispered Lieutenant Vexana. "The gravitational forces should have torn his ship apart." Jake's voice came through the speakers, calm and relaxed. "Nice asteroid field you have here. Very realistic physics simulation." "All physics calculations are accurate to real space conditions," replied the computer voice. "Good to know," Jake said, as his ship spun between two asteroids that were only a few meters apart. "That means I can do this." He fired his ship's engines in short bursts, using the exhaust to push against nearby asteroids. Each push changed his direction just enough to slip through gaps that looked too small for his ship. He was moving faster and faster, bouncing from rock to rock like a ball in a pinball machine. Sethkar's forearms moved frantically over different control panels. This is not how the test is supposed to work. The pilot should be moving slowly through pre-calculated safe routes. "Sir," reported Morden, "the human has crossed the outer asteroid field in 2 minutes and 37 seconds. The previous record was 11 minutes and 42 seconds set by the Korathi war ace Kallax the Destroyer. And Kallax crashed into the fortress wall and died." Vexana added. "He never even saw the enemy ships." Jake was now deep inside the asteroid field where the first enemy ships waited. These were small, fast fighters with powerful weapons. They were programmed to use advanced tactics that had been developed over centuries of galactic warfare. Theory end. First enemy ship appeared from behind a large asteroid, its weapons already firing. Red laser beams cut through space toward Jake's fighter. Any normal pilot would try to dodge or return fire immediately. Jake turned off his engines and let his ship drift. "Warning," said the computer voice. "Engine failure will result in mission termination." "No engine failure," Jake replied cheerfully. "I turned them off on purpose. The enemy ship's targeting system was designed to track fast-moving targets." When Jake's ship suddenly stopped moving, the alien fighter's computer did not know what to do. It kept firing at where Jake's ship should have been, not where it actually was. Jake drifted silently through space while laser beams passed harmlessly around him. When the enemy ship got close enough, he turned his engines back on and rammed into it at full speed. The collision destroyed the enemy fighter instantly. "Target 1 eliminated," Jake announced. 16 to go. In the control room, alarms were starting to ring. The simulator's computer systems were working harder than they ever had before. The quantum processors were trying to calculate flight patterns that were not in their programming. "The AI is struggling," reported Chief Engineer Voxrum, his mechanical arms sparking as he checked multiple readouts. "The human's flight patterns do not match any known tactical doctrines. The computer is having to create new response algorithms in real time." 3 more enemy ships appeared, attacking from different directions. They formed a triangle around Jake's position and began firing in a coordinated pattern that should have been impossible to escape. Jake waited until all 3 ships were firing at the same time. Then he accelerated straight up, perpendicular to the asteroid field. The enemy ships had been programmed to fight in 2 dimensions like most space battles. They were not ready for someone who would fly in 3 dimensions. The 3 enemy fighters crashed into each other as they tried to follow Jake's vertical climb. Their wreckage tumbled into a nearby asteroid and exploded in a bright flash of light. 4 targets eliminated, Jake said. "This is easier than I expected." Sethkar stared at the screen in disbelief. In 800 years, no pilot has destroyed more than 3 enemy ships. The human has eliminated 4 targets in under 6 minutes. "Sir," Vexana said urgently, "the simulator's tactical AI is beginning to adapt. It is learning from the human's methods and changing its programming." "That should be impossible," Sethkar replied. "The AI is not designed to modify itself during active scenarios." On the main screen, they watched Jake's ship weaving through the asteroid field like it was dancing. He used every floating rock as a tool, bouncing off them, hiding behind them, and even pushing small ones into the path of enemy ships. It was like watching someone play a game that only he knew the rules to. "Computer," Jake said as he destroyed 2 more enemy fighters with a clever trick involving asteroid debris. Quick question about these enemy ships. Are they all using the same basic tactical programming? Affirmative. The computer voice replied. All hostile units utilize standard Federation threat assessment and engagement protocols. Perfect, Jake said with a laugh. That makes this much simpler. In the control room, warning lights flashed brighter as the simulator pushed beyond its normal operating parameters. Nobody knew what the human pilot was planning next, but they were all beginning to suspect that their perfect, unbeatable test was about to be beaten for the first time in nearly 9 centuries. Jake had now destroyed 6 enemy ships in ways that should not have worked. His fighter was moving through the asteroid field like it belonged there. Small pieces of rock and metal from destroyed enemy ships floated around his craft. Instead of avoiding the debris, Jake was collecting it. Computer, can I attach things to the outside of my ship? Jake asked as he flew past a chunk of enemy armor plating. Ship modifications during combat scenarios are not typically... The computer voice paused. This was the first time in 800 years that the AI had hesitated during a response. External attachments are theoretically possible if structural integrity remains within safe parameters. Great, Jake said. He used his ship's mechanical arms to grab pieces of floating metal and stick them to his hull. I have some ideas. In the control room, Chief Engineer Voxrum was pulling cables out of smoking control panels. The quantum processors are overheating. The simulator is trying to calculate scenarios that do not exist in its memory banks. Commander Zethkar watched the main screen with growing alarm. Jake's ship now looked like a flying junkyard. Pieces of asteroid rock, enemy ship armor, and twisted metal stuck out from all sides. It should have been too heavy to fly. It should have fallen apart from the stress. Instead, it was moving faster than before. How is his ship still functional? Demanded Lieutenant Vexana. The additional mass should have reduced his speed by 60%. Technician Mordun's tentacles were moving so fast over his controls that they were just a blur. The human is using the attached debris as both armor and weapons. When enemy ships fire at him, the extra metal absorbs the damage. When he needs to attack, he spins his ship to launch the debris like bullets. Jake's voice came through the speakers again. This is working better than I hoped. Hey computer, do these enemy ships have backup power systems? Affirmative. All hostile units are equipped with secondary power cores to maintain function if primary systems are damaged. And those backup systems are probably in different locations. On each ship type, right? Correct. Backup power locations vary by ship class to prevent systematic targeting. Jake laughed. You know what? That does not matter at all. He flew straight at the 7th enemy ship, spinning like a drill. The pieces of metal attached to his fighter tore through the enemy's weapons, engines, and hull all at once. The enemy ship tried to return fire, but Jake's improvised armor deflected the shots. Within seconds, the enemy fighter was nothing but floating scrap. 7 down, 10 to go, Jake announced cheerfully. The simulator's AI was now working at maximum capacity. Every quantum processor in the facility was dedicated to trying to understand what Jake was doing and how to respond to it. The problem was that Jake kept doing things that were not supposed to be possible. Sir, reported Voxrum, the AI is rewriting its own tactical programming. It is creating new combat scenarios based on the human's actions. That cannot be right, Zethkar said. The AI is not designed to modify core programming during active use. It is happening anyway, Vexana replied, staring at her readouts. The computer is learning to think like the human pilot. Jake was now approaching the most dangerous part of the asteroid field. Here, the rocks were packed so tightly together that there was barely room for a ship to pass through. Most pilots spent 20 minutes or more finding safe routes through this section. Many never made it through at all. Jake looked at the wall of floating rocks ahead of him and made a decision that would have terrified any sane pilot. He aimed his ship at the exact center of the thickest cluster of asteroids and pushed his engines to maximum power. Warning, the computer voice announced. Current flight path will result in multiple collisions and certain destruction. Only if I try to fly around the rocks, Jake replied. But what if I fly through them instead? He opened fire with all weapons, blasting a tunnel through the asteroid cluster. Rock and ice exploded in all directions as his ship's lasers carved a path through solid stone. Jake flew through the tunnel he was creating, his ship's hull scraping against the rough walls. The attached debris on his ship caught on the tunnel walls and was torn away. But instead of slowing him down, this made his ship lighter and faster. He burst out of the asteroid cluster like a bullet, trailing chunks of rock and metal behind him. Impossible, breathed Zethkar. He just flew through solid rock. The energy requirements alone should have drained his ship's power completely, added Vexana. But Jake's ship was still moving, still fighting, still doing things that defied all logic and reason. 3 more enemy ships attacked him as he emerged from the asteroid tunnel. Jake did not even slow down. He used the debris cloud behind him as a weapon, letting the pursuing ships fly into the shower of high-speed rock fragments. All 3 enemy ships were destroyed instantly. 10 down, 7 to go, Jake said. This is actually kind of fun. The simulator was now in full crisis mode. Warning alarms rang throughout the facility as system after system reported impossible conditions. The AI was processing more data per second than it had in its entire previous existence, trying to keep up with Jake's unconventional tactics. The quantum matrices are approaching critical overload, reported Morden. If this continues, we may have permanent system damage. Jake was now in the inner ring of the asteroid field, where the final enemy ships waited. These were not just fighters. They were heavy assault craft with thick armor and massive weapons. They had been positioned to guard the approaches to the central fortress, and no pilot had ever reached this area before. Jake looked at the 7 remaining enemy ships and the fortress beyond them. The fortress was huge, covered in weapon turrets and surrounded by energy shields that could stop battleship attacks. It was the final challenge of the master test, the part that was supposed to be impossible. "Computer," Jake said. "Quick question about that fortress. The shields are designed to stop energy weapons and solid projectiles, right?" "Correct. The fortress defensive grid can repel all known forms of attack." "All known forms," Jake repeated thoughtfully. "But what about unknown forms?" He looked at the 7 enemy ships surrounding him and smiled. In the control room, the alien observers watched their sensors go wild as Jake prepared to do something that would push their simulator beyond its breaking point. "What is he planning now?" Zethkar asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. They were about to find out. Jake stared at the fortress ahead of him. It was bigger than anything he had ever seen. A massive structure of black metal and glowing energy shields. Weapon turrets covered every surface, all pointed in his direction. The 7 remaining enemy ships formed a protective ring around the fortress, waiting for him to attack. Any normal pilot would have tried to fight the ships one at a time, using careful tactics and precise movements. Jake had a different idea. "Computer," he said. "Those enemy ships are all trying to protect the fortress, right?" "Correct. The remaining hostile units are programmed to defend the central objective at all costs, and the fortress weapons are designed to destroy attacking ships without hitting the defenders?" "Affirmative. The fortress defensive systems utilize advanced target recognition to avoid friendly fire incidents." Jake's smile grew wider. "Perfect. That gives me exactly what I need." He aimed his ship directly at the center of the enemy formation and accelerated to maximum speed. The 7 enemy ships immediately moved to intercept him, forming a tight cluster as they prepared to focus all their firepower on his fighter. That was exactly what Jake wanted them to do. At the last second, Jake's ship suddenly stopped dead, in space. The 7 enemy ships moving at high speed could not stop in time. They crashed into each other in a spectacular explosion of metal and fire. But Jake was no longer where they expected him to be, while the enemy ships were destroying themselves. Jake had used his reverse thrusters to back away from the collision. Now he was flying in a wide circle around the fortress, staying just outside the range of its main weapons. "All enemy targets eliminated," Jake announced. "Now for the real challenge." In the control room, chaos reigned. Smoke poured from overloaded circuits as technicians ran between control panels, trying to keep the simulator from completely shutting down. "This is impossible," Commander Zethkar said for the 10th time. "No pilot has ever reached the fortress, let alone destroyed all 17 enemy ships." "Sir," gasped Technician Morden, "the quantum processors are operating at 200%. Capacity. The AI is trying to process tactical scenarios that violate basic military theory. The fortress should be impregnable, Lieutenant Vexiana added, staring at her displays. Its shields can stop attacks from entire battle fleets. Its weapons can destroy capital ships in seconds. How can one small fighter even hope to penetrate its defenses? They were about to find out. Jake flew his ship in a slow spiral around the fortress, studying its defenses. The main particle cannon tracked his movement but did not fire. He was too far away and moving too unpredictably for a target lock. The smaller weapons also followed him, waiting for him to come within range. Computer, Jake said. The fortress weapons are automated, right? They do not have living crews operating them. Correct. All defensive systems are controlled by advanced AI targeting protocols. And these AIs are programmed to identify and track fast-moving threats? Affirmative. The defensive grid is optimized for engaging high-speed attack craft and incoming missiles. Jake nodded to himself. What about really slow threats? Are they programmed to handle those? The computer paused again, longer this time. Slow-moving. Objects are typically classified as debris or non-threatening materials. Defensive protocols for such targets are limited. Thought so, Jake said. He brought his ship to a complete stop, floating motionless in space about a kilometer from the fortress. The fortress weapon systems immediately lost their target locks. Their programming was designed to track ships moving at high speed, not stationary objects. The targeting computers began scanning for Jake's ship, but could not find it because it was not doing what they expected. While the fortress weapons searched for him, Jake opened his cargo bay and began dumping everything inside. Emergency supplies, spare parts, even his own personal belongings floated out into space. Soon he was surrounded by a cloud of slowly drifting objects. Warning, the computer voice announced. Dumping cargo during combat scenarios may result in mission failure. Not dumping, Jake corrected. Deploying. He used his ship's mechanical arms to push the floating objects in different directions. Soon there were dozens of pieces of equipment drifting toward the fortress from all angles. To the fortress defense systems, it looked like a debris field was slowly approaching. The fortress AIs did not know how to respond. They were programmed to destroy fast-moving threats, not floating garbage. As the debris got closer, some of the smaller weapons began firing randomly, but they could not target all the objects at once. While the fortress was distracted by the approaching debris, Jake quietly restarted his engines and flew his ship into the middle of the debris cloud. Surrounded by floating objects moving at the same speed, his fighter became invisible to the targeting systems. Brilliant, whispered Chief Engineer Voxram in the control room. He is using the fortress's own programming against it. Jake drifted closer and closer to the fortress, hidden among the harmless debris. When he was only a few hundred meters from the main structure, he separated from the debris cloud and flew straight at the fortress at maximum speed. By the time the defensive systems detected him, it was too late. Jake's ship smashed through the energy shield like it was made of paper. The shield generators, designed to stop energy weapons and missiles, could not handle a solid object moving at such high speed. Jake crash-landed inside the fortress hangar bay. His ship skidded across the metal floor, throwing sparks and pieces of twisted metal in all directions. The landing was rough, but Jake and his ship survived. Phase 1 complete, Jake announced as he climbed out of his damaged fighter. Now, to find that quantum beacon. The fortress interior was a maze of corridors and rooms. Most pilots would have followed the designated route markers to reach the beacon storage area. Jake looked at the map on his wrist display and chose the most direct path instead. He pulled out his personal laser cutter, a tool meant for emergency repairs, and began cutting through walls. Instead of walking through the fortress corridors, he was making his own route in a straight line toward his objective. Warning, the computer voice said. Structural modifications to the fortress may result in catastrophic system failure. Only if I cut through something important, Jake replied, melting his way through another wall. But I am being careful to avoid the support beams. In the control room, alarms were blaring so loudly that the technicians had to shout to be heard. The simulator was trying to calculate the structural damage Jake was causing, but its programming had never anticipated someone cutting their own doors through a fortress. "The entire scenario is breaking down," reported Vexram. "The AI cannot process what the human is doing." Jake reached the beacon storage room in record time. The quantum beacon was a small crystal device sitting on a pedestal in the center of the room. Force fields and laser grids protected it from theft. The defenses were designed to stop anyone who tried to approach the beacon through normal methods. Jake ignored all the defenses and cut a hole in the floor directly under the pedestal. The beacon fell through the hole into his waiting hands. "Beacon acquired," he announced cheerfully. Now for the fun part. Jake held the quantum beacon in his hand. It was smaller than he expected, about the size of a coffee cup, but it glowed with an inner light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. According to the mission briefing, he now had to return to the starting point of the test. Most pilots would retrace their path through the asteroid field, assuming they had made it this far. Jake had no intention of going back the way he came. "Computer," he said as he climbed back into his damaged fighter. "The mission objective says I need to return to the starting coordinates, right?" "Correct. Mission completion requires delivery of the quantum beacon to the original departure point." "But it does not say I have to use the same route, does it?" The computer voice hesitated longer than ever before. "The scenario design assumes pilots will utilize established navigation protocols and follow safe passage routes through the asteroid field." "Assumes, but does not require," Jake said with satisfaction. "Good, because I have a much better idea." He started his ship's engines and flew up through the hole he had cut in the fortress ceiling. The fortress weapons tried to track him, but they were still confused by the debris field he had created. By the time they figured out where he was, Jake was already outside the fortress and accelerating away. But instead of flying back toward the asteroid field, Jake pointed his ship straight up, perpendicular to the plane where all the asteroids floated. This direction led into empty space that was not supposed to be part of the test scenario. "Warning," the computer announced. "Current flight path exceeds scenario boundaries. Please return to designated testing area." "The scenario boundaries are just suggestions, right?" Jake asked. "I mean, space does not really have walls." In the control room, every alarm in the facility was now screaming. Technician Morden's tentacles were smoking from moving so fast over his controls. "Sir, the human is flying outside the programmed scenario space. The simulator is trying to generate new areas of space to match his flight path." Commander Zethkar stared at the main display screen. It showed Jake's ship moving through regions that had never been programmed into the test. The computer was frantically creating new asteroids, new star patterns, and new physics calculations to keep up with Jake's movements. "This is impossible," Zethkar said. "The scenario has fixed boundaries. Pilots cannot fly outside the testing area." "Tell that to the human," Lieutenant Vexana replied. "He is currently 17,000 kilometers above the scenario plane and still climbing." Jake's ship was now moving through space that existed only in the simulator's mathematical models. The computer was working so hard to create this new environment that sparks were flying from processors all over the facility. "Computer," Jake said, "quick question about space-time. In a simulation, space is just a mathematical construct, right?" "Affirmative. The testing environment utilizes quantum calculations to model three-dimensional space with accurate physics. And if someone was really good at math, they could theoretically find shortcuts through that mathematical space." The computer's voice now sounded strained, like it was struggling to process Jake's questions. "Theoretical mathematical shortcuts through simulated spacetime would require processing power beyond current technological capabilities." "Beyond current technological capabilities," Jake repeated. "But not beyond current technological reality. I mean, you are calculating all this space right now, which means the processing power exists." Jake did something then that broke every rule of physics, computer science, and common sense. He began flying his ship in a pattern that formed a complex mathematical equation. His flight path traced out formulas in three-dimensional space, using the simulator's own quantum calculations. "As a navigation system, he is using our own processors as a flight computer," gasped Chief Engineer Voxram. "He is making the simulator calculate a shortcut through its own programming." The result was spectacular. Reality twisted around Jake's ship as the simulator tried to process what he was doing. Space folded in on itself like a piece of paper being bent. The normal rules of distance and time stopped making sense. Jake's fighter suddenly appeared at the test's starting coordinates, having traveled through folded mathematical space in a journey that should have taken 30 minutes but happened in 30 seconds. Mission complete, Jake announced cheerfully. Quantum beacon delivered to starting coordinates. Total time elapsed, 23 minutes, 47 seconds. The simulator's AI tried to respond but only managed to produce a sound like a computer, having a nervous breakdown. Then every system in the facility shut down at once. Emergency lighting came on as the main power grid overloaded. Smoke poured from control panels throughout the station. In the sudden quiet that followed, Jake's voice came through the emergency speakers. "Hey, is everything okay out there? I heard some loud noises." The simulator chamber doors opened with a grinding sound. Jake stepped out, still holding the quantum beacon, and looked around at the chaos he had caused. Alien technicians were running between sparking control panels with fire extinguishers. Warning lights flashed in patterns that hurt to look at. Commander Zethkar stood in the middle of the control room, staring at Jake with an expression of complete bewilderment. His forearms hung limp at his sides. "In 847 years, he said slowly, no pilot has ever completed the master test." "Well," Jake said with a shrug, "maybe you just needed someone who did not know it was supposed to be impossible." Lieutenant Vexana looked at her smoking control panel. "The simulator's core programming has been permanently changed. The AI learned 17 new tactical concepts during your flight, including 3 maneuvers that our physics models say should not exist. The quantum processors will need to be completely rebuilt," added Voxram. "Your flight pattern created mathematical paradoxes that burned out half our processing cores." Jake looked genuinely concerned. "Oh no. I hope I did not break anything important. I was just trying to find the most efficient solution to the test." "Efficient?" Zethkar repeated faintly. "You call breaking our most advanced computer system efficient?" "Well, I did complete the mission in under 24 minutes, Jake pointed out. "That seems pretty efficient to me." Dr. Quintel, the station's head scientist, materialized from a cloud of crystalline fragments. Her species could exist as both solid matter and pure energy. "The human has fundamentally altered our understanding of tactical thinking," she announced. "His methods violate established military doctrine but achieve superior results. We will need to study human flight patterns extensively," Zethkar said, still sounding stunned. "And we will need to redesign the master test to account for unconventional problem-solving approaches." Jake handed the quantum beacon to Vexana and smiled. "Happy to help. Though you might want to upgrade your computers first. I have a few more ideas I would like to try, and I do not think your current systems could handle them." As Jake left the control room, the Federation's greatest military mind stood surrounded by the wreckage of their most advanced training system. Within hours, emergency messages would be sent to every world in the galaxy. New research programs would be started. Military academies would add courses on human-style tactics, all because one pilot from Earth had refused to accept that some problems could not be solved. The age of human influence in galactic military affairs had begun.